Okay, Namaskar, good morning. Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, WASH, Infection Prevention and Control, including Biomedical Waste Management, hosted by the National Institute of Disaster Management in collaboration with World Health Organization. The provision of safe water, sanitation, and hygienic condition is essential for protecting human health during all infectious disease outbreak, including of coronavirus 2019, that is COVID-19. Ensuring evidence-based and consistently applying wash and water management practices in communities, homes, schools, marketplace, and healthcare facilities will help prevent human-to-human transition of the virus that caused COVID-19. To enlighten us in this topic, we are graced by the presence of distinguished speakers, Dr. Anuj Sharma and Dr. Manjeet Saluja from World Health Organization, Dr. Pratibha Singh and Dr. Apurva Chaturvedi from UNICEF, and Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal and Professor Surya Prakash from NIDM. Before we start, we have a very packed up schedule, and before we go any further, I would like to bring certain point to your notice. Your active participation is important throughout the session. However, we urge everyone to stay on mute to avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to the webinar. Throughout the presentation, we will be managing the chat, and you can enter your questions and comments in the chat box. Once all the speakers had their presentations, we will have the question answer sessions. Now for our keynote address, we have with us Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, VSM recipient. During his more than 3 decades of service to Government of India, he has held important commands and staffs assignments such as Deputy Director General in Directorate of Army Air Defense, Director of Center for United Nations Peacekeeping, and many other. Without further ado, now I would like to call upon Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, Thapa. Can you just check if the speakers have joined?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. What we will do, since we have 3 of the speakers who have already joined, we will start the proceedings, and I'll just say a few words because we have such a good list of eminent speakers after the seminar. Dr. Anuj Sharma, who's from WHO. Then we have Dr. Manjeet Singh Saluja again from WHO. We have Dr. Pratibha Singh and Dr. Apurva from UNICEF, and Dr. Surya Prakash from NIDM. And WHO and UNICEF has been doing a great deal in this particular field for a long time. They are connected at all with the multi-stakeholder engagement, from the policy making right down to the last mile connectivity. And in fact, today, when you Google things on WASH or infection control, you find most of the publications and good articles I'm saying, are written by WHO and by UNICEF. So we are very, I'll say, happy that they have joined, and I'm also happy that WHO and NIDM are collaborating for the series of webinars on health and pandemic related issues, which is so relevant because we are aware that healthcare associated infection, it is one of the most common complications of healthcare management, and in pandemic we have been seeing it time and again. It is a serious health hazard, and because it increases the patient's morbidity, mortality, his stay in the hospital, the cost associated with it, everything. Studies have also shown that more than 10% of the diseases are caused within the hospital itself due to this infections that is there in a healthcare facility. So there is a need to design practical ways and implement them so that this is controlled. We have handling of transmission-based precautions are there, cleaning, sanitation, safe water, food provision. So these are non-medical interventions. Then there are many medical interventions which are there for controlling also, and for making the preventing also. So that we will be having the speakers to speak on both these topics, so that the issue is very clear to all of us. And one of the offshoots of this whole healthcare system, which can be now in a healthcare facility or in a quarantine center or in a isolation center also, as pandemic has proved. Uh, if you remember, so many people in the quarantine center are getting affected from each other. So there are non-medical interventions are something which is easily doable, but it requires a lot of resources and it requires a lot of awareness, for which this webinar will be very helpful. Biomedical waste is an offshoot of the whole thing. And now we are seeing how the biomedical waste is creating enormous problems because of the way they are being disposed of. Uh, there was a campaign when the AIDS came of destroying the needle. So many things were found. The earlier people used to keep it in a jar, and after using it, put it in the jar. And then it was found that once you throw them, they get recycled back. So then they had these electric burners in which they put the needle and it gets shunted, so that it cannot be used. It has to be made again. So all these measures have come up over a period of time. So even for this biomedical waste, because of the complexity of the large amount, so the whole world is suffering, it has become a huge problem. A normal biomedical waste of a hospital uh, can be managed, but here there is a biomedical waste from every household which is getting affected. And even if not affected, we don't know whether the person who moved out and who finally throws his mask or gloves away, what it has. So that's biomedical waste management, I think, should be rethought. Even though there are so many guidelines, so many policies, even the Ministry of Environment also has given out, ICMR, NABH, they're all working on this issue. But I think we should talk about large scale biomedical waste management. Yes, hospitals, some hospitals, not all, have that segregation and everything. So all that is working fine. But I find that the root cause is once it goes to the terminal end. We have found now biomedical waste floating around in rivers, in oceans and seas. So the terminal end, if it is controlled, how they are treated or destroyed or disposed of, I think that will ensure that the infection due to biomedical waste is reduced to the minimum. So today, with this, I will finish my talk because we have already lost some time today. And I'm keen to hear the speakers who will be coming after it, who will be talking on this issue in great detail and enlightening us. And I'll expect the participants to raise a lot of questions, pertinent questions, so that they can be answered by the speakers as and when those questions are going to be entertained. But you must keep writing your questions on the chat box, because the interaction tells us more than the presentation itself. With this, I once again thank all the participants for joining and the speakers for sparing the valuable time to come on this webinar. Thank you so much. Over to you, Raju Thapa.
And those of you who have just joined us, welcome to today's webinar. Like sir has rightly mentioned, India has specific rules to deal with biomedical waste, but the COVID-19 present a very unique challenge before our country, where it has currently to deal with underestimated amount of biomedical waste, exclusively from dedicated COVID hospitals, quarantine centers, and home quarantine facilities in cities, towns, and district headquarters also. The task has become all the more difficult as many states lack strict monitoring mechanism. Without further ado, for our next presentation, I would like to call upon Dr. Anuj Sharma from World Health Organization. Dr. Anuj is a public health professional and has worked with WHO headquarters, 2 regional offices, and more than 18 WHO country offices. facilitating developed of national policies, strategies, action plan, and WHO technical documents on antimicrobial resistance, safety, and e-health. 2006, he back at the WHO country office for India as technical officer for antimicrobial resistance and health laboratories, and is working closely with the government for contamination of antimicrobial resistance and strengthening health laboratories. He has also been awarded as the IMA Dr. A.P. Shukla Memorial Distinguished Service Award in 2007. With this, I hand over the stage to Dr. Anuj Sharma. Over to you, sir.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to talk on infection prevention and control for COVID-19. And I look after three cross-cutting areas at the WHO country office. One is antimicrobial resistance, other is laboratories, and the third, the newest addition, is infection prevention and control. Now, a little bit about this virus which is causing COVID, the SARS coronavirus 2. This is an enveloped RNA virus. It has 4 structural proteins, and it has an RNA it's an RNA virus, and the lipid envelope is sensitive to soap and surface active agents. So the easiest way to kill the virus is through soap and the other disinfectants, which Mr. Manjeet will be talking about. And this is a relatively smaller virus. And the reason this virus is, we can use masks which have a much larger pore size, is that this virus is not expelled from the human body from an infected patient as a single virus. This is part of the respiratory droplet transmission. So if you're looking at the respiratory droplets, the average size is between 5 to 10 microns, and this necessitates close contact with the infected people for this to be transmitted. Another mode of contact of transmission is contact either directly with the infected patient or indirectly through fomites. So the first mode of transmission, droplet transmission, is the basis for physical distancing. We have to keep distance from the infected people. And the contact mode of transmission is the basis for why hand hygiene is so important, because the contact from an infected patient or through fomites is primarily through the hands, and these hands bring the virus to the face, nose, mouth, or eyes, which leads to the infection. Another mode of transmission is the airborne transmission, which is not very common, but this is seen primarily in the hospitals, where droplet nuclei, which are less than 5 microns in size, but these are generated only during aerosol generating procedures, which involve intubation, suctioning, ventilation, tracheostomy, or resuscitation. Now, the aim of the infection prevention and control is to limit the spread of the infection, primarily to reduce transmission of healthcare-associated infections, including COVID, ensure safety of staff, patients, and the visitors in the healthcare facility, and also reduce the risk of the health facility amplifying the outbreak of the infection. Now, the strategy to address or prevent COVID is standard precautions have to be used in all patients. Triage has to be done properly to recognize the suspected cases early, to ensure that you're able to control the source of the infection, which are the infected patients. In addition, you also need to implement empiric additional precautions for suspected cases, have some administrative controls in place, and also use environmental and engineering controls to ensure infection or the pathogen does not pose a risk to the people in the hospital or to the environment. So biomedical waste management becomes extremely important. Now, if you look at standard precautions, it's a set of a couple of things. The most important out of the standard precautions is hygiene, hand hygiene. And standard precautions are to be observed as the first line of defense. And this is not just for COVID, but also for all other respiratory or other infections, including those transmitted through blood and other body fluids. So hand hygiene is extremely important. Second important thing is respiratory hygiene or the cough etiquette, which again, especially for respiratory infections becomes extremely important. Ensuring that the people at risk wear personal protective equipment according to the risk that they face is important. Safe injection practices, sharp management, and injury prevention are also important as a part of standard precautions. Not so important for COVID, but these are a part of it. The other four parts of the second half of the standard precautions: safe handling, cleaning, disinfection of patient care equipment, environmental cleaning and disinfection, safe handling and cleaning of soil linen, and biomedical waste management will be tackled by my colleague, Mr. Manjeet Saluja. Now, when we talk of hand hygiene, you need to remember the 5 moments of hand hygiene. Before you touch a patient, before any clean or aseptic procedure, after exposure to blood or body fluid, after touching the patient, or also after touching any of the patient's surroundings. So these are advocated as a norm for all patients, not only for COVID patients, but for all patients. Hand hygiene is the single most important way you can prevent infections in a healthcare facility. And not just in the healthcare facility, also in the community. Now, it's important to keep in mind that you need to know how to hand rub and how to wash your hands. These are very simple things, but it's important to keep in mind when your hands are visibly dirty, you have to wash your hands. If you see any dirt on your hand, you cannot use a hand rub. The alcohol-based hand rub can be used as a substitute for hand washing when you don't have the facilities for hand washing. So the time is important for the duration. It's a minimum of 20 seconds for a hand rub and a minimum of 40 seconds for the hand wash. And the steps are basically the same so that you cover all the surfaces of the hand. Palm to palm, palm to back, the fingers interlaced, then also the tips of the fingers by interlocking your fists, the area around the thumb, the tips of the fingers, and in the end, you need to keep your hands in the air so that they dry. Ideally, you are not supposed to use anything to wipe your hands. The extra time for hand rub, the last 10 seconds in the 30 seconds, is for allowing it to dry. 20 seconds in the hand wash, 40 to 60 seconds. The last 20 seconds are for allowing them to dry, especially if you are in a hospital. Now, if you're talking of the respiratory hygiene or the cough etiquette, it's important to ensure that you cover your nose and mouth with a tissue. If tissues are used, discard it immediately into trash. Also, if you're coughing and sneezing, you turn your head away from others and you cough into your sleeve, especially if no tissue is available. And always remember to clean your hands with soap and water or an alcohol-based hand rub after coughing or sneezing. Also, spitting is to be avoided. To promote respiratory hygiene, it's important to provide masks for patients with respiratory symptoms. So now we have universal masking, which has the premise of my mask saves you, your mask saves me. So this will ensure that the infected people who are infected are unable to transmit the infection to the others. Also, hand washing has to be encouraged for all patients with respiratory symptoms. Physical distancing is extremely important, and it's also important to have visual reminders of respiratory hygiene and the hand hygiene in place. Now, when we talk of the risk of infection, it's important to ensure that you do a risk assessment. And keep in mind that the risk is the likelihood of something happening and the consequences of something happening. Now, if you're walking on a tightrope, you have the risk of falling down. And if you're walking on a tightrope and you're experienced, your risk is low. But if you are inexperienced, your risk of falling down is high. Now, if you're doing the tightrope act slightly above the ground, the consequences of the fall are going to be not much. However, if you are doing the tightrope act 30, 40 meters above the ground, then you have a serious risk of injury. So the consequences are very great. So accordingly, you need to look at the use of personal protective equipment on the basis of the risk that you face. Assess the risk of exposure and the extent of contact anticipated with respiratory droplets or blood and body fluids. Accordingly, select the personal protective equipment. Hand hygiene is extremely important, and the assessment needs to be done for each and every patient every time, and this has to be a part of the routine. You have various types of personal protective equipment: face masks, N95 masks, face shield, goggles, gowns, body covers, aprons, gloves, as well as head covers. Now, these have to be used on the basis of the risk which is perceived, and Ministry of Health has excellent guidelines which are available on the MHFW website, which guide you for this. When we use personal protective equipment, the full set, it's extremely important to follow the proper steps of donning the PPE and doffing the PPE. Donning is when you put them on, and doffing is when you remove the PPE. This is for your own safety, and the steps of doffing are extremely important, much more important than donning, because that's the time when majority of the people get infected if they are not careful while taking off the PPE. Also, you need to ensure administrative controls are in place. You need to have trainings for the healthcare workers. You need to have adequate patient to staff ratios. You need to have surveillance in place, especially for acute respiratory infections like SARI and ILI, and also for COVID. Also, you need to ensure that not just the healthcare workers, but also the public, the patients, and the visitors to the hospital understand the importance of promptly seeking medical care, what to do when, what not to do, and what to do. Also, monitoring the compliance with standard precautions and suggesting improvements is also a part of the administrative controls to reduce infection. Another important area to reduce infection is triage and the waiting area. And in the triage and waiting area, physical distancing is extremely important. And the term social distancing has been used, but it's important to keep in mind WHO favors physical distancing because we are connected socially. It's the physical distance that we need to maintain in the regular waiting areas, but especially in the respiratory waiting areas. You need to adhere to standard precautions at all times. Access to hand hygiene products should be available, especially in the triage area. You have to maintain physical distancing, also have thermal screening in place, and the healthcare workers who are involved in physical examination of the patients with the respiratory symptoms have to wear the full set of personal protective equipment. Now, a little bit about antimicrobial resistance, and we've seen that co-infections have been very common in pandemics. In influenza pandemics, a lot of these infections were historically associated with bacterial co-infections, although randomized control trials have found the rate to be between 11 to 35%. But earlier, during the First World War and subsequently, there have been reports of nearly 75% of these infections having a bacterial co-infection. And the organisms commonly for this co-infection were Strep pneumoniae and Staph aureus. However, in the past 6 months, we've seen that secondary or co-infections in COVID-19 patients is variable. It is less than influenza. The rate varies anything from 8% to 45%, and it has a different co-pathogen profile, which is completely different from influenza. It has Acinetobacter, Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, Mycoplasma, Chlamydia, Enterobacter, Serratia, as well as some fungal pathogens. And most of these organisms are drug resistant. Also, because a lot of these patients are on antibiotics, a number of them, it is difficult to pick up the bacterial co-infections. Also, it is being seen that the critically ill patients have higher proportion of co-infections. Antibiotic use is also increased in the COVID because the symptoms are just like community-acquired pneumonia. There's also sepsis and septic shock as one of the presentations. Telemedicine is being increasingly used, and doctors tend to overprescribe antibiotics as a safety net. Mechanical ventilation, immune dysfunction, corticosteroids which are being used for treatment, all of them predispose to bacterial infections which lead to widespread antibiotic use, both empiric and directed. And it's been seen that nearly 70% receive antibiotics, although documented infections is in less than 10% of cases. Also, the underestimation of bacterial co-infections because of increased use of antibiotics. Now, because AMR is such a huge concern, and also otherwise, WHO came out with the clinical management of COVID-19 guidance document, and this very clearly gives the outline not just for antibiotics, but also the overall patient management. And especially for antimicrobials, it says very clearly that there is no role of antibiotic therapy or prophylaxis in mild cases. In moderate cases, antibiotics may be used if there is a clinical suspicion of a bacterial infection. And if antibiotics are used, they have to be from the access group of the antibiotics. This is on the basis of the AWARE classification. Access, watch, and reserve. So access is the first line antibiotics, watch is the second line, and reserve is the third line antibiotics, the high-end antibiotics. So for moderate cases, you have to use the access antibiotics if they are indicated. For severe cases, you can use empiric antimicrobials to treat all likely pathogens based on your clinical judgment and the patient's presentation. And these have to be started as soon as possible within 1 hour of initial assessment. Have to take blood cultures first and assess for de-escalation every day. At the WHO office, we've also started this COVID-19 IPC Samiksha, which is a compilation of recent publications on COVID-19, which are relevant for infection prevention and control and containment of AMR in India. These contain 4 groups of publications. One is publications from scientific journals. A brief key points from each article are summarized. Then we have WHO guidelines. We also have Ministry of Health and other GOI guidelines. And it also has IEC and training resources. And the last section deals with COVID-19 and antimicrobial resistance. 3 editions have been released, and these are available on the WHO India website. The next edition is in the pipeline and will be released in the next 2-3 days. Now, this COVID pandemic has also brought around collateral benefits. There's a strong focus on infection prevention and control, especially hand hygiene. For preventing healthcare-associated infections, we've been pushing for hand hygiene for a very long time. And this COVID has ensured that not just in hospitals, but also in the community, hand hygiene has become widespread. So we are likely to see a reduction in infections in times to come. It has taken India so many years to ensure, and this COVID-19 has helped. Spitting in public places has become a punishable offense. The COVID has also brought the whole of government and the whole of society together in fighting this COVID. Health services has been recognized as a critical need, and also the investment in health has also been recognized. Financial sort of importance of investing in health. So I would like to summarize by saying protect yourself, ensure you are socially connected but physically distant, keep your hands clean, your safety is in your hands, respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette should be observed, make sure you don't touch your face, nose or eyes, and when you wear a mask, make sure you don't touch the front side of the mask, which is supposed to be infected. Make sure masks are worn universally, but especially for symptomatic cases and those providing care. Face covers should be used for people in the community and for the healthcare workers. Standard precautions and wearing PPE according to the ministry's guidance is extremely important. Also very important, discard them safely after use. So thank you very much. I'd like to end here. Over to you, Raju.
Thank you, sir, for your thoughtful, thought-provoking presentation. Dr. Anuj Sharma rightly highlighted hand hygiene as one of the most effective action we can take to reduce the spread of virus. Although the importance of hand hygiene in preventing infection with the COVID-19 virus is high, access to the hand hygiene facilities that include alcohol-based hand rubs as well as soaps and water is often suboptimal in the community and in healthcare facility settings, especially in low and middle income countries. According to WHO report, according to WHO report, estimated that globally 3 billion people lack hand hygiene facilities at home, and hand hygiene is the most effective single measures to reduce the spread of infection through multimodal strategies, including access to the appropriate strategies. Now, for our next presentation, we have Dr. Manjeet Singh Saluja. He's NPO to WHO here in India. Manpreet has been working in the area of environment and development in last 18 years. He's currently working with World Health Organization country office in India as a technical focal point on environmental health that include issues of water and sanitation, climate change, air pollution, and its effect on public health. He has also previously worked in several other projects such as technical advisor for the Indo-German Environmental Partnership Program, UNDP, etc. Dr. Manjeet Singh Saluja, sir, over to you, sir.
So, yeah, I can now share it. Okay. Is my presentation visible to you?
Presentation visible.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I think an excellent context has been already been set by Dr. Anuj from my organization, who has kind of now given you already a beautiful context. So in my presentation, what I'm talking about is certainly on the wash aspect, on water sanitation, hygiene, and touching upon also on the biomedical and the environmental cleaning aspects. And we'll also be kind of talking about what is right now the technical guidance which is available from WHO and from the government sources, and also how we kind of move ahead and kind of try to integrate and mainstream these issues into the programming cycle. So just giving you, I think, yeah. So sharing with you the latest figures as of yesterday, and I think Dr. Anuj has beautifully put that the rope is kind of going higher and higher now. The risk is increasing, and ultimately kind of the danger of falling and is kind of more grave now. So we are kind of almost since last few days, where India is getting around 15,000 cases, and that's the daily addition which is kind of being added to the tally, and overall 400,000 cases kind of confirmed COVID cases have already been there. This is as per the last 22nd June update from Ministry of Health. So just to kind of give that context that yes, the risk is increasing and we need to be more careful. Why WASH is kind of vital to the COVID-19 response and recovery. So WHO kind of its strategic response plan, the strategic preparedness response plan certainly outlines the public health measures that the international community stands ready to provide support. All countries kind of to prepare and to respond to COVID-19. And this document, we have also learned that so far the virus that translates into kind of the knowledge and strategic action that can guide efforts of all national and international agencies when developing context-specific national plans. So that's the kind of the WHO strategic response plan and the operational guidelines which have been there. So WASH is in the pillar 6 in the infection prevention control, as well as in pillar 2 and pillar 7. So you already see the kind of the cross-cutting nature of this particular issue. And the key updates which there are in terms of the recommendations is continuation of the essential wash services during the outbreak, provision and operation maintenance of hand hygiene facilities in public places, which becomes very important, provision of hygiene supplies in the vulnerable households, and provision and monitoring of wash in healthcare facilities, because that is, I think, where it becomes a major kind of recommendation. And community engagement for hygiene behavior and hygiene behavior change. So these are the kind of 5 recommendations which have been there with this particular update. Moving on to the next slide, and I think I'm So I think Dr. Anuj already talked about the WHO Safe Hands Challenge, and which was launched in March 2020, and has already shown how what are the 6 steps. So there's a high-level advocacy on certainly on the hand hygiene aspects, and in the country there is a need, there's a grave need to kind of address this big existing gap, because if we look at the evidence from the country, I think households in India which kind of lack water and soap for hand washing. So roughly around 25% of the household, which kind of becomes of paramount importance, especially in this pandemic. And somewhere around, if we talk about the institutions, only 60% of the schools have basic hand hygiene washing facilities with soap and water, and that again in the operation and maintenance aspect is another kind of issue out there. And 27% of the functioning sub centers have gender separate toilets in terms of the males and females. So that's where there's a kind of huge opportunity to address these issues. So WHO, along with other partners like UNHCR, we are trying to increase increase access of the hand washing facilities in front of these public buildings and places, which has been the major recommendation. And if you see one of the pictures from on the side is a foot-operated hand washing station in one of the Central Delhi's district magistrate's office. So we are trying to kind of demonstrate these contactless hand washing stations in Delhi. So we certainly need innovative solutions and kind of using existing breweries, making these alcohol-based hand rubs, or cities putting these hand washing facilities. So those are the kind of innovations which we certainly need. Talking about how has WHO been kind of sharing the WASH technical brief. So we have been kind of, this first technical brief was published on 3rd of March on water sanitation, hygiene and waste management for COVID-19. So this technical brief, the key messages which were kind of shared in this technical brief for all the member states was certainly kind of frequent and proper hand hygiene was one of the most important prevention measures. And the existing WHO guidance on the safe management of drinking water and sanitation services applied to the COVID-19 outbreak, and there are many co-benefits which could be realized through good wash. It's not only prevention of COVID, which is kind of right now the foremost importance, but certainly including preventing millions of deaths which are each year which are caused by other infectious diseases, and that's where this many co-benefits could be realized. And WASH action and investments could be kind of fundamental to all the country response plan. So that was the original brief, and this kind of an updation was taken on 23rd April, where some more kind of recommendations were added, as I think has been covered in the previous presentation. So the ideal materials are water and soap, or we have the alcohol-based hand rub, and the duration and all has been already been covered. So the water does not need to be drinking water quality. Okay, so we don't need the highest kind of standards of water for hand washing, and the water quantity could be 0.5 to 2 liters per person. So we can kind of design very efficient hand washing stations, looking into the aspect that many, especially in this heat wave scenario, there are many regions in the country which kind of face a lot of water scarcity. So we can design hand washing stations which kind of use very less of water, and I think from 0.5 liters per person. With the kind of considerations for the hand washing facility design needs to be kind of touchless, whether it's elbow or foot operated, or if it's sensor operated. But I think even in the remote areas, I think the best is the foot operated or elbow operated, which kind of does not need much of technology, because we also have issues of again, sensor operated would have issues of energy issues. So therefore the size and quantity and appropriate for type and the number of users, because we need to see how much people are in the vicinity and what kind of size would be required. The facility to capture and empty grey water, which becomes a major consideration, and then easy to repair and locally sourced parts, which kind of is a very important kind of consideration, considering the operation and maintenance in that particular area. And the hygiene promoters need to be considered as essential service providers and should be given free movement and necessary protection when we are kind of were in a situation of a lockdown. So hygiene promoters become very, very important people. In terms of WHO recommendations on the universal access and use of hand hygiene facilities, this interim guidance was again shared on 1st of April, and there are certain key points which I would like to mention. I think some of them have already been covered, but certainly the maintenance and by building manager and transport provider or kind of private sector, the whole aspect on maintenance becomes very important, because it's very easy to kind of install a infrastructure, but then how to kind of use its sustainability becomes very important. And again, the access part where it is kind of accessible in front of all the public building, which are including schools and healthcare facilities, and also the transport locations, which was kind of emphasized. In terms of the cleaning and disinfection, covering that aspect as well. So the recommendation by WHO was published on 15th May in terms of the cleaning services, and there I would like to kind of mention the key recommendations were to train the cleaning staff on the policies and SOPs of the healthcare facilities and national guidelines and use of PPEs and safe use of chemicals, because we are seeing the staff is not being kind of, we have guidelines, but then how to kind of really implement those guidelines, and that's where this whole importance of training of staff and having a standard operating procedure becomes kind of very important. Ensuring disinfectants meet the local authorities' requirement for kind of market approval, and including any regulations which are specific for particular sectors. For example, the healthcare and the food industries, and disinfectant solutions should always be prepared in well-ventilated areas, so it does not kind of lead to any kind of industrial accident as well, and which kind of becomes very important. So that's what the kind of recommendations on the cleaning services. But then there was also a recommendation, especially on the healthcare facilities aspect, which I'm covering in this particular slide, where there was this recommended frequency of cleaning of environmental services according to the patient areas with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 patients. That the guidance was kind of shared out there. So as I think we mentioned about the triage area, so the frequency, the recommendation was to have at least twice of cleaning by the disinfectants, and focus on the high touch services, and then the last to be the floors, because again floors we are kind of not touching it by hands, and then the infection is not getting transferred. But the high touch services like the doorknobs and kind of other areas need to be disinfected quite regularly. And so the recommendations were about the inpatient rooms, the outpatients, the hallways, and also the patient bathrooms and toilets, which becomes very, very important. Again, the whole aspect on high touch services area, services including the door handles, the light switches, the counters, the sink balls, and then finally the floor, which kind of you can take that order, and avoid sharing toilets between the staff and patients. If there is an infrastructure, we kind of they really need to see if we can avoid sharing toilets, so that the staff are kind of at less risk of infection. So that was on the environmental cleaning aspects. Touching upon the biomedical waste management, and that's where even the Central Pollution Control Board has been issuing guidelines on the biomedical waste management, and they have been revisions which have kind of the guidelines was issued on 18th March. The first revision kind of which talked about disposal of the any point from anybody, or can I continue? Yeah. So so this guide issued from on 18th March, and then subsequent revisions have been taking place. The last revision has been on 10th of June, which certainly has kind of the guidelines issued, which have advised to incorporate the guidance on the segregation of general solid waste and the biomedical waste. And this revision also addresses the safety of the waste handlers, sanitation workers associated with the healthcare facilities. So that whole issue of again the segregation aspect, especially in an isolation center, where even the general waste like the food waste and all should also be treated as an infectious waste, which is kind of coming from patients, and also making the whole biomedical waste infrastructure, for example, the dustbins and all, which the different color coded dustbins, if we can kind of make it more contactless and have foot operated dustbins, which kind of has been one of the recommendations of the last provision in the biomedical waste management, which becomes very, very important again, which becomes a very high touch surface and kind of becomes a source of infection. So that was on the biomedical waste management. Again, coming back to kind of the access to hand hygiene, which is kind of certainly low. When I've already discussed about the India data in terms of the homes, the schools, and the healthcare facilities. I think I'll not dwell upon much in terms of the data, but yes, the point has been also emphasized in the national policies and plans and the global documents as well. And I would like to mention one of the documents which kind of emphasizes this need is in terms of the GLASS analysis, which is the global analysis on an assessment on sanitation and drinking water. The 2019 report, which kind of has data from approximately 115 countries, also talk about that only 9% of countries had costed hygiene plans and reported having enough financial resources to implement the plan. We were not ready for a pandemic like COVID, which kind of really focuses on the hand hygiene aspects, and that's where this grave kind of gap exists, which we kind of need to strengthen further. So certainly, as we said, that opportunity to strengthen the whole the hand hygiene and the wash infrastructure. There needs to be a systems approach to achieving this universal hand hygiene, and which we kind of talked about the opportunity. There's a chance to kind of institutionalize these infrastructure and systems into to reduce the risk of future outbreaks. The specific efforts which are there in different settings, whether they are the healthcare facilities or the schools or the kind of childcare centers or the workplaces which are there, the collective action needs to be kind of there. Again, we need to kind of talk about the intersectoral action, the whole of society coming together, which we have seen even happening in our country. UNICEF and WHO, we are working collaboratively with key international organizations, and I think the speaker after is from UNICEF and would kind of also be focusing on these issues. The country action is certainly at the core. We have the global evidence, but then the action has to happen at the kind of field level, and ultimately the purpose of the whole initiative is to accelerate global action on hand hygiene and wash infrastructure in support of the country roadmaps and targets. So what we can kind of do from here is certainly focus on first is the evidence and learning. We need to have more and more evidence in terms of this becoming an important part. And the evidence has to be kind of curated and disseminated. There has to be a peer-to-peer learning. The intersectoral and the multi-stakeholder support needs to be there. We need to kind of take advantage of the existing networks and innovations and kind of rally the whole supply chains towards those aspects. Certainly, there needs to be an increased investments for hygiene infrastructure, and where we have seen there is still a kind of a lot to cover in this aspect. And then even after that, we need to kind of monitor progress and bring together the monitoring tools and results and monitor both enabling environments and certainly the kind of outcomes. The future roadmap from here looks like where we kind of talk about the enabling environment, where we are kind of focusing on the policies and strategies, the institutional arrangements, the financing, the planning, monitoring and review, and the capacity development. We need to have the access to the whole infrastructure, whether it's wash, biomedical, or the hand hygiene in public places or in kind of private locations. That access has to be there, and then the whole behavior change becomes very, very important. The whole promotion of hygiene kind of becomes very important. Okay, so that's where kind of the roadmap is, and for this roadmap, I think we need to take a phased approach for it. We and kind of since we are into the pandemic, so there needs to be a clear short-term deliverables which needs to be kind of implemented to control the outbreak, to prioritize hand hygiene in public places, where and review the regulatory and the legal framework and assess the gaps and kind of plug those gaps needs to be kind of there in the short term. In the medium term, we need to kind of look at the structural reforms and look at how wash infrastructure needs to be kind of emphasized, and that gaps need to be filled, and which kind of talks about building back better the whole approach of kind of having a recovery which is better than what was there previously. And then the long-term thing is to kind of how do we sustain that whole culture, the whole behavior change aspects, and kind of that infrastructure which is made available during the pandemic phase and even in the immediate future. How do we kind of sustain it? And there is a culture of hygiene kind of which is inculcated in the community. We implement those structural reforms, enhance the regulatory and legal foundation, and kind of routinely monitor and enforce hygiene requirements in public settings, including the schools and healthcare facilities. So that's where the whole phased approach needs to be taken. So I think that's it from my side. I'm just some of the reading list and the documents which we have shared, and I think maybe kind of useful to you. So we can share this reading list with you. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Raju.
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening presentation. Thank you, sir, for your enlightening presentation on primary prevention of COVID-19 and other infectious disease, and showing us the roadmap in short-term, mid-term, and long-term approach to deal with the situation. For an update, we regret to inform you that due to some technical issue, Dr. Pratibha Singh from UNICEF India could not join us in the webinar. However, we are trying to get in contact with her and we'll try to bring her in the webinar. So for our next presentation, we have Dr. Apurva. She is a health expert at UNICEF India. She has been working very closely with government, UN agencies, academic, and civil society organizations across all levels of healthcare. Dr. Apurvo has also briefly served in Africa during post-Ebola period for supporting services. Currently, she is supporting the COVID response on maternal, newborn, EMTCT, and adolescent health services, including IPC and WASH for UNICEF. Thank you, ma'am, for your thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Raju. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, so let me share my presentation. Is the other slides are visible? Okay, I'm encountering an echo in my own system. I don't know why, but it's okay. I'll proceed. So, good afternoon, everyone, and special thanks to NDIM and WHO for organizing this important session and for having us on board. And as Raju mentioned, I regret Dr. Pratibha is trying to join, but she's experiencing some problem with the link. So we hope that she would be joining soon for this session. And my WHO colleagues have already covered the technical aspects in detail, so it makes my work very easy. And some of these slides might be an overlap or repetition, but then repetition refreshes the memory. So I'll go with that thought that whatever I'm presenting will be sort of revision. But I've also included slides on state experiences and what is actually happening in the field for IPC and WASH measures during COVID times, considering that UNICEF has presence in 24 states through our 13 field offices, and our teams are actively engaged in supporting healthcare facilities, outreach, community sessions, and ensuring that IPC and WASH measures are put in place. So I think those will be highlighted more by me during the session, and I would be briefly touching on the technical things which have been just covered. So let me start with my presentation, and again thanking the organizers for having me here. So basically my slides will talk about what is IPC, but in brief, and what are the components, and more so I will now focus on the state experiences and what are some of the best practices we are encountering in the field. So as the presenters have already emphasized it, and I don't need to establish the importance of IPC, we know that IPC is rooted in patient safety and health service quality. So it is not just about making the environment, the health staff safe, but it is also a very important aspect of quality. And I would add to it that it is also part of respectful care. If you are providing infection prevention control measures and taking WASH measures, it also relates to dignity and respect and quality of services. And it's a very scientific approach with practical solutions which are easy to implement if implemented properly. And it is important that our whole healthcare facilities, especially in these COVID times, do not become another site of transmission. So IPC measures and WASH measures are important. Sorry. We know who is at risk of infection. Everyone is at risk of infection. The way this virus is transmitting, and Dr. Anuj has already explained in detail how it transmits through contact and respiratory droplets, everyone is at risk. But then there are high risk groups and people who are at higher risk from severe illness if they get COVID. And these include our older adults, people above 65 years of age, our parents, our grandparents who need to be taken special care of, and these measures become important. Then we have people who have underlying medical conditions like heart disease, diabetes, lung disease, kidney disease, people who are on cancer medication, and also a very important group, pregnant women, because we don't know what is the exact impact of COVID on the pregnancy. So it is better to take care. And that is where the government of India recommends that these are the high risk group and we need to take special measures when caring for these at whatever locations, be it health facility, be it home, be it quarantine centers. And we know IPC is the key barrier for for preventing the spread of COVID-19. And you're not just protecting yourself or your patients, but if we follow these measures, we are also protecting our family, our community, as well as the environment. And in longer term, we know it has many impacts on our economy and everyday life, the way it has impacted. These were the 5 key strategies. Dr. Anuj already explained the importance and provided details. I'm just highlighting the ones which is the triage, which is helping for early, which is extremely important for early recognition and isolation of suspected patients so that we are able to break the chain of transmission at the moment we understand that this is the transmission happening. Standard precautions, no, not, especially the respiratory hygiene measures and hand hygiene, which has been emphasized. The additional precautions which are required for preventing droplet and contact and airborne transmissions. The administrative controls, which are important, like investing in infrastructure, training, surveillance, and environmental and engineering control, which Dr. Manjeet just talked about. So just to tell about triage, it has to be a system, a triage to be put in place at the health facilities for all patients who are coming to our centers, because this is helping us to early recognize the possibility of COVID infection and immediately isolate patients and suspected disease in an areas. So this might be a repetition, but in my next slide, I will show you how it is being implemented. For the triage, we are encouraging the healthcare providers to have a high level of suspicion. The health facility should have a well-equipped triage station at the entrance, which is supported by a trained staff. Now, training of staff is something which is extremely important, and WHO and UNICEF have been collaboratively supporting Government of India in conducting trainings. And I think over the course of last 3 months, this is the momentous training schedule and trainings I have seen ever in my public health career. The way trainings have happened using e-platforms, and almost every staff in the healthcare facilities was covered across the country. Then also instituting a screening questionnaire so that you have a dedicated checklist to understand according to the updated case definition which person is to be triaged and how to manage. Ensuring distance of 1 meter between the staff and the patient. Also waiting room chairs, if they can be placed 1 meter, that is the ideal. Maintaining one-way flow of patients, clear signage and symptoms. Then family members should wait outside the triage area because this will help in preventing overcrowding. Our conventional methods or the way we see our hospitals are with one patient, there are 10 attendants who come. But with COVID, this is the learning that this will lead to more infections. So we should avoid, and anyhow that should be avoided. And hand hygiene and respiratory hygiene are essential preventive measures. Now, this is a good practice we observed in a sub-district hospital in Pune, Maharashtra. And as you can see, the guidelines were in bullet points, but here those bullet points are in practice. So there's a social distancing measures are implemented. You can see the triage area established outside the main hospital building. There's a screening form which is developed for suspected cases. So they use the screening forms. The protocols and IEC is displayed across the health facility. Then there is a dedicated entry to the COVID isolation ward, so it is not mixing with the other general areas. The isolation ward is well ventilated, a separate ward. Biomedical waste management and isolation is being followed as per the BMW guidelines. Then to take care of critical cases, there are 4 ICU beds which are ready for COVID patients with ventilators. And hand washing stations have been installed now also at the entrance of the buildings. Earlier they were inside the buildings. So these are some of the good practices which are happening in Maharashtra, and this is not just one facilities, many, but I thought it would be good to share that guidelines are now being implemented across facilities. And it is not only the facility, the outreach sessions and the sessions which are delivered at the community level. Here also it is equally important that infection prevention control measures are followed, especially use of mask, your social distancing, keeping the distance between the patient and the waiting area should have adequate spacing. So these are some of the photographs from the MCHN sessions held by ANMs in from Uttar Pradesh. And here you can see the way we conduct MCHNs have now changed. So there are social distancing circles which have been created. Also, the distancing between the sitting of the patients you can see, or the beneficiaries who are waiting for services. Now, during the lockdown and when we were having we started with the surge of COVID, there, especially in the containment zones, there was disruption of maternal and newborn care services. Now, gradually the services are resuming, and it is important that continuity of maternal and newborn care services are maintained at the health facilities. Uh, MCHN is maternal newborn child health sessions. So this particular slide is from Madhya Pradesh, where now they are providing services, but with proper IPC measures being followed. So if you can see the first photograph, there's a sick newborn care unit where care of sick and small newborn is taken. And in India, we have over 800 SNCUs now with COVID. They are triaging with proper IPC measures is being tried to be instituted. Kangaroo mother care is another important life-saving intervention, but here again the IPC measures and the precautions for COVID-19 are required. Then you can see there are now provisions being made at the health facility for making sure that there's a separate rooming in arrangement for COVID affected mother and child. Triage areas, screening of women and pregnant women in outpatient departments from Gwalior. This is one of the photographs. And then there's a high dependency unit, which is functional with effective kangaroo mother care. So the point I'm trying to emphasize is that services have to continue. This is the new normal of healthcare, and IPC measures with proper wash interventions are required. And not only the government sector, we are also observing that in private health facilities also the measures are being institutionalized. So this is one of the hospitals from Madhya Pradesh, Bhopal, and as you can see, the social distancing measures in the lifts, in the waiting areas, and IPC protocols across the facilities. Now, the second strategy was applying standard precautions, and I need not emphasize the importance of hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, and use of PPE according to the risk profile, safe injection practices, environmental cleaning. So these strategies are one of the gold standard and very much required, not only during COVID, but even otherwise also. And here we know that respiratory hygiene, there are many do's and don'ts, and Dr. Anuj has already elaborated in detail on these. While you're coughing and sneezing, use a handkerchief, move away your mouth, do not cover your, wash your hands immediately after you have covered your sneeze or cough, and do not spit in open, always use a wash basin or something where you are able to follow these respiratory hygiene behaviors. These are the various kind of PPE, and donning and doffing has been already talked about, and risk profiling is very important, and according to the risk profiling, use of that PPE has to be used. And additional precautions are required to prevent droplet and contact and airborne transmission for suspected COVID, and airborne precautions, particularly aerosol generated ones in certain special interventions and procedures for healthcare workers. So this is another IPC strategy which has already been talked about. Now this photograph particular is from the Assam, where I'm just trying to highlight that how standard precautions are being followed, not only at the health facilities, but even in other facilities and arrangements where services are being given. So you can see a boat clinic, which is trying to provide services across the riverine areas of Assam because of the floods. And, you know, Assam has many areas which are cut off from the routine services. So boat clinics are giving those services, and these measures are trying to be institutionalized there in the boat clinics, which is hand washing and use of sanitizers during home visits. And especially it is very important that our healthcare staff remains protected, and the chances of infection not only at the health facility but when they are visiting the houses and undertaking house-to-house visits. Our frontline functionaries, ASHA, ANM, Anganwadi workers, they need to be protected, and that is where comes the importance of use of mask, respiratory hygiene, hand washing, maintaining distance, and these practices are now being tried to be followed across the various states. Then the fourth strategy was about implementing administrative control, and where we talked about the importance of providing trainings, capacity building, and adequate healthcare workers. We know there's a huge burden on healthcare workforce at the current moment, and there's also a lot of burnout symptoms we are experiencing, and mental health issues are coming up, and there's lots of stress and strain. Not only the healthcare providers, the police personnel, the sanitary workers, the administrators, everyone involved in COVID is going through that time of fatigue. And there it becomes important that there are measures to address these issues to keep our health workforce motivated, so that they are able to implement all the precautions and undertake measures to keep themselves safe. So this is just one example coming from West Bengal state, where orientation of all district, block, and urban local bodies on RMNCHA guidelines was done using the E method. So we have to change the way we work and adapt to the new style of trainings and working. And this training emphasized on IPC, and they were able to cover the 23 districts and the entire state, and build the capacity of healthcare professionals, paramedics, and workers. Then there are then there were state task force meetings. So the leadership at the state level as well as the district level and intersectoral coordination. It's not just health department, but everyone from all quarters coming together, including the local PRIs. They have a very important role. And that is where the infection prevention control measures at the session sites, which usually happen at the Gram Panchayat or village level, can be implemented and monitored. So involving all these stakeholders, and then reorientation of IPC guidelines. There are hundreds and hundreds of protocol, and it's a human tendency that remember some, but if we don't practice, we tend to forget. And then every day there is some new technical guidance coming. So reorientation of healthcare workers, of everyone involved in this COVID response is important, and to make sure that we are updated with the latest guidelines and technical update. And if you can see a memo from the government of West Bengal on the service continuity, and all the top officials and leaders from the government are part of these strengthening measures. So the point I'm trying to make is that a good leadership and good administrative control policies and support is required. And then addressing the psychosocial issues during COVID scenario through collaborative approaches. Our healthcare workers, our frontline functionaries are engaged in COVID response 24/7, and we are observing the burnout and fatigues, and that is where they need to be counseled, they need to be supported. And this is an example from Gujarat state, where Gujarat State Institute of Health and Family Welfare has done a partnership with the State AIDS Control Society. And in consultation with eminent psychiatrists from various mental health hospitals, they are providing psychosocial support to the healthcare providers. And over 700 counselors have been mapped, and their capacity has been built on undertaking this kind of counseling through Cisco, WebEx session, telecounseling. So these are some of the good practices which are being happening. And if we keep our health staff motivated, I think implementing any measure, be it IPC, be it WASH measures, or be it clinical protocols, everything depends on a well-motivated and trained provider. There's another example again from Maharashtra, where in terms of environmental control and in terms of the administrative measures, they are maintaining stock of essential supplies and medical supplies in isolation ward. So it is very important that we don't run out of our PPs, we don't run out of our biomedical waste, supplies and equipment, sanitizers, disinfections, and we have adequate ventilation and isolation at the isolation facilities. So these are some of the measures with a separate hand washing unit and toilet attached to each COVID-19 ward in Inderpur. So these are being observed and people are taking measures. Dr. Manjeet already talked about environmental and engineering control, where he emphasized the importance of adequate ventilation. And I've also the slides which I've presented from various states with the hospitals, you can see that ventilation is being tried to be maintained, but also it is important that laundry, food services, utensil, medical waste, and in one of the chats I was reading the comment that medical waste, yes, end-to-end solutions are still not there and there's lots of innovations required, and it cannot be a knee-jerk response to a disease, but we require sustainable health system strengthening measures. Uh, you can see this picture from Government Medical College Vidisha, where you can see the ICU ward and an isolation ward, which is very well ventilated with a proper distance, and biomedical waste bin staff is wearing PP, and there are signages. So these are the measures which are being implemented. Then also, not only inside but also air handling units. There's a place for ambulance disinfection which has been created in the hospital to make sure that every time a COVID suspected or a COVID patient is transferred, the ambulance is properly sanitized. And we know that there is oxygen therapy is one of the most important requirement during COVID treatment. So they are maintaining essential stocks and supplies for oxygen. So this is also part of the IPC strategy where you are maintaining your essential supplies. And this would be my last slide, saying that it's in our hands and let's take care of each other. So either with our hands, we don't wash them and we spread the disease, or we hold our hands together and follow these measures and prevent these disease. So thank you very much. And then I again apologize for Dr. Pratibha not being able to join, because she would have shared some of the examples and practices for biomedical waste management from states. So this is from me, and over to you, Raju.
Deliberation on infection prevention and control during COVID-19 in India, highlighting the benefits of infection prevention and control and high-risk group triad system, and also sharing good practices of Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal. You also highlighted the collaborative approach to address psychosocial issue during COVID-19 scenario in Gujarat. Thank you, ma'am, once again. Now I would like to invite Professor Surya Prakash to share his view and experience. Professor Surya Prakash is the head of Geometeorological Risk Management Division and is in charge of 3 specialized centers in NIDM, National Institute of Disaster Management. He was previously associated with various prestigious institutions such as CBRI, IIT Roorkee, JNU, Wadia Institute of Himalayan Geology, FRI, VIT, etc. He has also published several national and international research publications, books, articles, etc. in some of the high impacted factor journals. Professor Surya Prakash, over to you, sir.
Raju, my sharing is okay now. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. My screen is visible?
Not yet, sir. Yes, sir, now it's visible.
Now it is visible. Okay. Let me start. My previous speakers, Dr. Anuj Sharma, Dr. Manjeet, and Dr. Apurva has told you views with medical perspectives or health perspectives and WASH perspective. I just highlight some of the issues that we come across as development and disaster managers. So I'll just mention that besides being a health issue, this pandemic has actually also become an issue of development and also disaster management. So I'll just try to highlight that while we are trying to deal with this problem, we can also, I think this slide, I need to minimize this. So some of the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 refers to health, safety, and quality of life, which has been talked by Dr. Apurva also. Say, for example, SDG 3 had talked about good health and well-being of human beings across the world. So ensuring healthy lives means following good hygienic practices and sanitation practices with safe quality water available to all the public. So it states in point 3.8, achieve universal health coverage, including financial risk protection, access to quality essential healthcare facilities and services. You know, nowadays, when this COVID had actually affected, we are not well prepared in terms of our health infrastructure. So we had to go for lockdown, prepare our infrastructure and resources to meet the huge challenge of COVID-19, which has spread across our public in different geographical localities. So we need to have quality of care in the health services and also access to safe, effective, quality and affordable essential medicines and vaccines for all. So all this we have tried to manage. What Dr. Apurva told, that we had got the ventilators, oxygen cylinders and all those facilities at our disposal to take care of emergency needs and care for the most affected victims of the COVID-19. The next point which was important from SDGs to be taken for this kind of situation is, by 2030 we had actually planned to substantially reduce the number of deaths and illness from hazardous chemicals and air, water pollution and contamination. Now with this virus, air is contaminated because of those droplets, and even getting exposed to those droplets becomes infected and fell sick. So in this order which we wanted to attain through SDG, as well as this was one of the targets, first target of our Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, reducing the number of deaths. Now this will be very difficult to be achieved by us by 2030, because during this period the number of casualties has increased to a good extent, which is now still not within our control. Next is 6, that is clean water and sanitation. This again is part of Sustainable Development Goals, in which it was decided that by 2030 we will achieve universal and equitable access and affordable drinking water for all. So now if anyone amongst us gets sick, is likely to spread this disease. So we have to ensure that, particularly during this monsoon periods, when water becomes contaminated and becomes source of several vectors, bacteria and viruses, which can actually spread out diseases amongst the communities in those areas. So we have to try to first provide this wash facilities to all on an equitable and justifiable basis. The next point is achieve access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene for all. Hygiene means we were having one of the webinar series on densely populated urban areas where resources are scarce and population is highly dense. So in those cases, it becomes very difficult to provide good sanitation and hygiene practices. So how to maintain and what kind of guidelines should be issued so that we have optimization of our resources for equal distribution. So that we have to see and pay particular attention to the vulnerable groups like women, girls, and old or sick people in vulnerable situations. So this point has also been highlighted by our experts from the health sector, that women, children, and old people, they are quite susceptible to the disease, and therefore their needs must be properly addressed. Then next is improve water quality by reducing pollution and eliminating dumping and minimizing release of hazardous chemicals and materials. Nowadays, sewerage and our water pipelines are going together underground, and sometimes there is a leakage from sewerage or septic tanks, and that leads to contamination of drinking water, which is sometimes remains unknown. In those cases, there is a likelihood of spread of diseases. So we must take care that our dumping mechanism, whether it is in terms of biomedical waste or other kinds of waste being released from houses or other areas or industries, should also be well taken care, so that it doesn't pollute or contaminate our water supplies. And proper recycling and safe reuse practices should be followed. Next is that safely manage water, sanitation and hygiene. That is what is being repeated again. But this is this particular slide I have kept because nowadays the technologies are very costly. So we have to devise innovative methods and strategies for increasing our preparedness against the pandemics. And one of the best ways. And any intervention? Okay, one of the best ways is taking adequate preventive measures at personal levels. That is wearing mask, washing your hands, sanitizing your hands whenever you are getting your exposure on an infected surface or touching an infected surface, and also trying to wear gloves if you are trying to touch the things repeatedly, so that it doesn't get into your body, or and remove those belongings before you reach your home, so that it doesn't affect others at your family. Good wash and waste management practices. This has been highlighted by my previous speakers, so I will not highlight more. So prevention is better than cure, we all say. So we will also try to follow this and implement all measures. I stress here, the behavioral change and the cultural change is very much required. Through the lockdown period and enforcement of the social distancing measures, wearing of masks and use of sanitizers and hand washing, we are trying to bring a cultural change, a new normal into our lifestyles in terms of behavioral changes, and strict adherence by following regulations, that in case somebody is in the public places, he should wear the mask, otherwise there will be a provision of penalty. So this will actually help us reduce the impacts of the disease and prevent it from affecting our population. Other is that if you are having some symptoms or signs, don't feel it that bad, because anybody can get affected by such syndromes. And if these symptoms have been noticed, you should always consult a doctor and get it checked up for the positive or the negative cases, whatever it may be. So the test must be done. It should not be taken, and for others, it should be also taken positively, because any person can get affected in such situations. So that should be, we should care for such people and give them adequate care, sympathy or empathy rather, not sympathy, so that they are not psychologically affected, or their mental health conditions remain stronger, which will help them build resistance against this disease or fight against this disease. So hand washing, only just to reinforce what my previous speakers have said, I have put it, these slides, that this what they have said is very, very important. Common use surfaces, wherever, whether we are using the file systems in the offices, handling the doors, knobs or the windows, are major sources of disease spread in a community. So if these are common places, we should avoid touching them oftenly, or should use a gloves while touching them, so that your body doesn't come directly in touch with those surfaces, and you can remove those gloves after the use. Then recommended foot operated, because most of the disease, the openings, the major three openings, nostrils, ears and eyes, are on your face. If you touch your face repeatedly, most chances will be there that the virus can get into the body. So we should try to use foot operated systems, which whether it is for door opening or using taps which are in the public or the common places, so that the hand use can be avoided or minimized. That's my colleague Dr. Manjeet has already said that 20 to 30 seconds with sanitizer and about 40 seconds minimally with soap and water for hand washing, just to reinforce his views with my. Another point that we have come across during this webinar is that one of the experts told that it's not only through the air droplets, it can also you can get infected from the toilets, from the urination and the toilet facilities, so which are common places. So we should avoid that also, and there also proper disinfection and sanitization should be done. Finally, I would like to mention some of the guidelines from our Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, as well as from National Disaster Management Authority. These are guidelines which has been recently revised for medical waste management. There are rules which have been revised in 2016 and 18 by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. There are programs by Government of India called Kaya Club, national guidelines on clean hospitals under Swachhta Abhiyan were issued in 2015. National Quality Assurance Standards for Public Health Facilities issued in 2017, and National Patient Safety Implementation Framework 2018 to 2025. I'll also like to mention that during this COVID-19 situation, our Ministry of Home Affairs actually constituted 11 empowered groups. The empowered group 1 actually prepared a medical emergency management plan during April 20. This has been presented and accepted. So that plan should be consulted and implemented. And NDMA during its course of activities also had issued special guidelines for safe hospital safety in 2016. Now, I think in the COVID situation, there may be a requirement for some revisions or modifications, but those hospital safety regulations and measures which has been suggested under these guidelines must be followed, so that we can avert and prevent the actually infection and diseases, at least among our hospital staff and the doctors, as well as paramedics. Guidelines on psychosocial support and mental health services in disasters. It was released in December 2009. Most of the disasters, the psychosocial care becomes one of the priority issues, because trauma is created and it results into post-trauma stress disorder, PTSD we call, and this needs to be properly, timely addressed by the experts. So in the COVID-19 situation also, we have come across people who have taken it otherwise in terms of their infection or likelihood of getting exposed, and some of them actually took wrong steps also. So those people actually need psychosocial support and to be made stronger in terms of their mental health conditions. Guidelines on management of biological disasters, which were issued in July 2008, and guidelines on medical preparedness and mass casualty management in October 2007. Maybe in the COVID-19 situation now, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has also issued special guidelines and procedures for disposal of dead bodies. So all those guidelines which has been issued by our Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, National Disaster Management Authority, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, as well as various developmental agencies in terms of sustainable developmental goals, I would request that all those must be followed for reducing the risk and avoiding your exposures to minimize the spread of the disease. Finally, I would say a Czechoslovakian verb that misfortunes enter when window is left open to them. We do not leave any space for this disease to affect us or to get spread. So blockchain technology has been utilized very well by some of the states. Try to block this chain of spread, and this will help us in containing the disease. So nowadays, only the containment, care, and control through preventive measures are the options available to us till a good treatment is available or a vaccine becomes available to us for management of this COVID-19 disease. With these words, I thank you all, and I would request Mr. Raju Thapa to kindly see if the next expert has joined, or we can take up question and answers. Raju, over to you.
Thank you, sir, for your informative presentation and stressing on the Sustainable Development Goals, relative national guidelines on disaster management, preventive measures, sanitation, and hygiene. Our next speaker is unfortunately unable to join us, but now let us move to our next section. That is, now we will take some questions raised by our participant. We have been flooded by the questions raised by the participant, but due to time constraint, we will restrict ourselves to only 4 to 5 questions. The first question is for Dr. Anuj Sharma. One of the participants asked, it is learned that 80% cases with asymptomatic are asymptomatic in Tamil Nadu. How to deal with such cases in contaminant zone, quarantine centers, and COVID hospitals? Over to you, sir.
Asymptomatic infections are an issue, and for this particular reason, it is extremely important to follow standard precautions in all cases. So universal masking, which is now the government of India has also sort of made masking mandatory for all people, and now it is also being recommended within homes. So universal masking and standard precautions are the basis to address asymptomatic cases, because we have seen, in fact, ICMR commented earlier on months back that they had also observed nearly 80% of the cases were asymptomatic at the time of diagnosis. The majority of these are actually pre-symptomatic and develop symptoms later on, but some of them continue to remain asymptomatic. So the only way you can address them is to have standard precautions, ensure physical distancing, use of masks, and for suspect cases, ensure you follow the appropriate use of personal protective equipment. And when we talk of PPE, keep in mind the use of gloves should be done very carefully, especially outside hospital settings. Because up till now, there is no documented case of percutaneous transmission of COVID infection. Therefore, if you're using gloves, make sure that you do not touch your mobile, you do not touch your face, you do not touch any of your personal belongings which you are going to touch with your ungloved hands. So a better option is make sure that you carry a hand sanitizer with you and sanitize your hands after touching frequently touched surfaces. Because use of gloves outside a controlled setting like a hospital may be difficult to maintain. Over.
Thank you, sir. Now we have one question raised by the participant, Manjeet Saluja. The question is, what precautionary measures have been taken in the slum area of different states to make people aware of the importance of safe drinking water, sanitation, and health? Sir. Sir?
I understand.
Dr.
I think Manjeet had another meeting and he's already left. Would Dr. Apurva like to take that?
Dr. Apurva, ma'am, are you there? I think she has left. I will ask the Dr. Anuj Sharma to kindly take this question.
The Ministry of Health has actually issued guidelines for highly populated areas. They haven't called it slums, but for highly populated areas, there's a Ministry of Health guidance document which is available, in which they have outlined all the steps which are needed to prevent any clustering of cases in highly or densely populated areas, which include not just physical distancing, hand hygiene facilities, but also making them aware about the transmission of the disease and how they can protect themselves. Also, the use of masks and ensuring everybody understands the need to follow the precautions. And they've also provided the hand rubs to these, especially in certain slum areas, especially in Mumbai, in Dharavi, where they managed to sort of control the clusters and tackle it effectively. Over.
Thank you, sir, for your response. So the next question is for Professor Surya Prakash. The question is, what can be done to decentralize the issue of e-pass at state level, national level? Sir? Professor Surya, sir?
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Now you are audible.
Okay. Raju, actually e-passes were made as a provision during the lockdown period to allow the movements of essential commodities and even some of the non-essential commodities. So now after the unlock, that e-pass requirements are no more there except in the containment zone areas where the movements have been restricted by the local administration. So e-passes are issued by local administration based on the emergency requirements of those people for movement on those areas. So e-passes are issued by the local authorities.
Thank
Is it
you,
okay?
Sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Now I will keep one question open for all the speakers. The question is, number of COVID death toll is less in some countries such as Russia. Like, is there any best practices available that we can learn from them? Sir.
Dr. Anuj may like to say something.
I'll have to ask my colleagues about this because I'm not aware of the best practice. There have been best practices which Sweden actually talked about, and I think a week after they talked about their best practices, they started having more cases in Sweden. So even the Sweden model has not really been so effective. This is an evolving pandemic, and this is a new virus, and we are still learning about it. A number of countries are reporting low cases, but it's really low cases. Is it one of the ways to assess the reporting of cases by any country is the number of tests per million population. If that figure is high, then you're reasonably sure that you're picking the majority of cases. But if the testing per million population is low, then you're likely seeing the tip of the iceberg. What is being effective in preventing the deaths? It's still, up for debate. There are a number of good practices from some of the countries. In fact, the Czech Republic started this campaign, Masks for All. This, I think, was much before WHO or CDC or the Ministry of Health in India endorsed the use of masks. They started promoting masks for all, I think, in February. And logically, despite having no evidence for this, they went ahead with this, and now this is being endorsed by all the organizations, including WHO, CDC, and the Ministry of Health. So there are a lot of good examples from other countries where you can pick and see what works and what doesn't work. But I would like to stress the importance of surveillance. Surveillance is critical to understand that the amount of infections that you have, contact tracing can be done effectively so that you are able to manage the burden of the infection. So we are still learning, and hopefully we'll have good examples coming from India. Within India, we have some of the states which have managed to effectively control their outbreaks. The Bhilwara is a case in point. Then you also have good examples from Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, as well as some of the other states. So I would not like to highlight any one particular example. And I'd like to say that we are still learning about this virus, and we will still come across better examples of containment in the months and weeks to come. Over.
Professor Surya Prakash would like to add some point.
I think Dr. Anuj has rightly said, we have to go for intensive surveillance and more testing. That will actually give us a good idea or assessment of the level of the problem, and then taking adequate preventive steps to control the disease. So as I said in my lecture also, blockchain methodology, blocking the spread of the chain and the midway through several techniques, and that will be possible only if we have good intensive surveillance and testing in place. So several countries actually tried this, and they did it, and taking preemptive action. In disaster management, we say prompt, preemptive, and proactive actions are important for reducing the risks. So preemptive means, as he said, in Czechoslovakia, they started the use of masks much before actually it spread across the country. So taking adequate preventive steps in timely manner, in a preemptive manner, will surely help us keep it under control. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We ensure all the participants that all the questions, suggestions raised has been noted, and we will share the questions with our expert and make a report of question and that will be shared with all the participants later. Now, I would like to call upon our ED NIDM Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal for his concluding remarks. Sir, please.
Thank you, Raju. It has been a really enlightening.
Muted, sir.
Okay. Now can you hear me? Can you hear me, Thapa?
Yes, sir. Now you are audible.
Okay. Okay. So firstly, I'm very thankful to the speakers who have given such knowledgeable presentations on different aspects, and everyone covered a different aspect. Like Dr. Anuj Sharma covered the WHO's guidelines and the various policies. And then the state's interventions were covered, and then Dr. Surya Prakash linked it to the Sustainable Development Goals. And in the question answer session also, so many relevant issues came out. But in the last, I really like what Dr. Surya Prakash spoke about. Preemptive and proactive actions can only help out in this case, which is true. And also in this, if the traditional wisdom is added, it does help. Many countries had a slow onset because of the traditional practices that we were following, like hand washing, namaste technique, which the whole world has now adopted. Japan and certain East Asian countries used to have a practice of wearing masks in normal times also. So in those countries, the onset was slightly slower. But still, this preemptive and proactive action, especially in the case of India, has been very, very effective. On 17th of June, Hopkins University also took out an article showing top five countries which have done such practices as an index, and which India was one of them. And it is also, you can just imagine that we just have infection rate of just 4 per million, which is one of the least in the world among those top, say, 100 countries who are affected. I think we are somewhere to the last. So that itself, whereas the density of population is so high and the conditions are different, still we have such a low rate of infection, talks about that, yes, a lot of efforts are going on and people are doing it, but there is a lot more to be done. And for that, WHO and UNICEF in particular, both the two organizations are doing a great job. And they are helping the community in a big way by reaching out to the community, by educating them, by helping them through their projects and through their own initiative. So I'm thankful to WHO and for collaborating for this collaboration with NIDM, and Dr. Anu Sharma, who represents WHO. I'm really thankful to you, and we will be looking forward for more such webinars for the awareness campaign in future. Thank you so much. Over to you, Raju.
Thank you, sir, for your concluding remarks. With that being said, we have come to the end of this webinar. So, in the end, I, on behalf of National Institute of Disaster Management, would like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the honorable distinguished speaker, Dr. Anuj Sharma, Dr. Manjit Saluja, Dr. Apurva Chaturvedi, and Dr. Pratibha Singh, who unfortunately could not join us, and Professor Surya Prakash, who blessed us with their presence and knowledge and took out their valuable time from their busy schedule. Also, I would like to extend a very special thanks to our ED NIDM Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal for providing encouragement, support, and inspiring us in all our endeavors. I heartily congratulate all the participants for their active participation in the event. I would also like to thank Dr. Saurav Dalal from World Health Organization for his enthusiastic support, and despite his busy schedule is always available for assistance. As no program can become successful with a single person, so I extend my big thanks to our GMRD team, Dr. Harjeet Kaur, Mr. Anil Kathet, and also our IT team for making this webinar a successful event with their contribution. I would like to end this webinar by bringing it to your notice that the next Tuesday, that is on 30 June, will be the last webinar of this 5-webinar series, and I will urge all the participants to join us in the webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you.